So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation. It's the best way to unite our nation.
Coming up this morning on KCCI 8 News Close Up, President Biden addresses his withdrawal from the race and endorses his vice president as the next nominee. Now, former President Trump speaks out against his potential new campaign opponent in his first campaign rally since Biden's announcement. We'll have full analysis on what's happening on the campaign trail.
If you don't mind, I'm not going to be nice. Is that okay?
And major changes to abortion access, the strict ban that takes effect tomorrow, and how Iowans will feel the impact.
This is Iowa's news leader. This is KCCI 8 News Close Up.
Good morning and welcome to KCCI 8 News Close Up. I'm Chief Political Reporter Amanda Rooker. It has been a busy week following President Joe Biden's announcement that he is ending his re-election bid and endorsing his Vice President Kamala Harris. Harris has secured enough delegate endorsements from Democrats to become the party's presumptive presidential nominee. That does include Iowa's delegation to the Democratic National Convention. In a unanimous decision last week, they all decided to endorse Harris. And Iowa's delegates were initially pledged to President Biden, but are now able to vote however they'd like after Biden dropped his re-election bid. Now, despite the party's endorsement, delegates are not required to be loyal to the candidate to whom they are pledged. And Iowa law also allows delegates to vote as they choose. This year, delegates will officially select their nominee in an online vote that will happen by Wednesday, August 7th. Now, that is about 2 weeks before the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. That convention kicks off on August 19th. And in an address from the Oval Office, President Biden gave his first official speech since dropping out of the presidential race. That was 3 days after announcing his historic decision. He shared his plans for what will now be the final few months of his half-century-long career in politics.
You know, there is a time and a place for long years of experience in public life. But there's also a time and a place for new voices, fresh voices, yes, younger voices. And that time and place is now. Over the next 6 months, I'll be focused on doing my job as president. I will keep working to ensure America remains strong and secure and the leader of the free world. I'm the first president in this century to report to the American people that the United States is not at war anywhere in the world.
Now, hundreds of White House staffers showed their support for the president, holding a watch party at the White House during his remarks. Earlier that same day at a rally in North Carolina, former President Donald Trump turned his focus to his likely new rival.
Lion Kamala Harris has been the ultra-liberal driving force behind every single Biden catastrophe.
Also on Wednesday, Harris spoke in Indianapolis. She talked about the importance of Black Americans casting their votes. She's expected to announce her choice for a running mate by August 7th. Well, here in Iowa, in less than 24 hours, the state's new abortion law will take effect. After ruling that there is no constitutional right to abortion in Iowa and upholding the law, the state Supreme Court denied Planned Parenthood's request to rehear the case. The law bans abortions once fetal cardiac activity is detected. Doctors say that can be as early as 6 weeks of pregnancy before many women know that they're pregnant. The law does include narrow exceptions for reported cases of rape and incest if the fetus has an abnormality that's, quote, incompatible with life, or in the case of a medical emergency. Now, this law was on hold for nearly a year until the Iowa Supreme Court allowed it to take effect in a 4-3 ruling last month. This law will be enforced starting at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Planned Parenthood predicts that the law will eliminate roughly 98% of abortions in Iowa. Some doctors say it may also change how they're allowed to care for pregnant patients and families. I sat down with Des Moines OBGYN and Iowans for Health Liberty co-founder Dr. Francesca Turner to talk about what this law means for her and for her patients. What impact is this law going to have on pregnant women in our state?
I can't say for sure what's going to happen, but we can look at what has happened in every other state that has passed abortion restrictions, and we can see the impact it has had on the women and families in that state. There's increasing rates of maternal mortality. There's increasing rates of infant mortality. There are increasing rates where women are not able to leave their domestic abuser. So we have no reason to believe that's not going to happen in exactly the same way in the state of Iowa. We also have studies studies that show abortion bans decrease applicants to medical schools and residencies in states with abortion bans, so they're less likely to get doctors into the state to stay in our state. Currently, Iowa is in a maternal health care crisis.
You are an OBGYN in Des Moines. What do you think about how this could potentially impact you and your patients in terms of pregnancy complications, in terms of complying with this law in the medical emergency exception?
I think it's going to be difficult because there is no clear definition of what the medical emergency is or where the life of the mother comes into play. And so there are examples where there is a pregnancy that is intrauterine but is in the scar of a C-section. Well, that's an intrauterine pregnancy with a heartbeat, but they can't survive there because that uterus could rupture open. Do we have to wait until that pregnancy continues to grow into that scar and that uterus could rupture open? Or can I treat that patient now, knowing that they're eventually going to become unstable? We have stories from women across the country where they're told to go sit in bathrooms and wait till they bleed more. Go sit outside in a parking lot and wait until you become more septic, more sick, until we can give you standard of care medicine. This isn't appropriate. And what is it going to take? We have seen this time and time again, and there's no change. And why do we think Iowa's going to be different? It's not. And this is what we're faced with.
I talked to one of the Republican lawmakers who led this effort. They said part of what they learned from other states was that lawmakers should not be the people deciding what qualifies as a medical emergency and what does not. And that's why they put the Iowa Board of Medicine in charge. You feel like your license, could potentially be at risk with the Iowa Board of Medicine being the board of people that will make those determinations?
I feel the Board of Medicine was put in a very complex position, and I don't know if that's a position they should have been in, but I feel there are clear-cut guidelines and standard of care that we follow, and sometimes that is in direct conflict with the law. And those exceptions that are tried to put in there to seem reasonable, I don't feel are very protective for the physician-patient relationship, and is just inserting the government into a place where they don't belong. Studies have shown abortions have not decreased in the United States since the abortion bans have gone into effect. In fact, they've slightly increased because women aren't having access to care. And so their desired effect is not going to happen.
For people who may not know what standard of care means, could you define that, what is standard of care, and why do you feel like it may be at odds with some pieces of this law?
So we go to school for a really long time, and then we do a residency, and typically we're 30 by the time we start working. In all of those years of training, are colleges, so American College of Family Practice or American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology. They do studies and research and figure out what is the best way to care for people. How do we keep people alive? What is the best practices for everyone? And then they put out guidelines and standards for us to follow. And so some of the laws, or some of the parts of the law, make it harder for us to follow standard of care medicine, such as the exception for life of the mother. It's just this very vague, medically inaccurate term, and so it's hard for us to follow because they're not using medical terms, because they're not following standard of care. The best decision would be to allow physicians who are trained to practice medicine, and not let the government involved.
Now that this legislation will be enforced starting on Monday, how do you anticipate that doctors will be interpreting this law?
I hope doctors are going to practice standard of care medicine in our state, and I know we have some of the best doctors in the country in our state, and I believe we can do that. But I think there's going to be that chilling effect. Doctors are going to stop and think about, okay, where does the law start? What can I do? What is this effect going to have on my practice? And when there's emergencies at 2 o'clock in the morning, do physicians have the time to stop, think about it, call the hospital attorney, see if they're practicing within the confines of the law? We worked hard. Nobody wants to be a criminal. That's not something I ever thought would happen to me when I'm just taking care of women.
And what has it been like for you the past few months or even years watching this play out in other states and being an OBGYN and thinking, how could this be me?
Yeah, I mean, I go to conferences with doctors from all over the country, and I hear their stories and I hear them talk about trying to give patients the care that they deserve, trying to practice within the confines of their state law. I watched the women in Texas who brought a lawsuit against the state testify on the stand and get very emotional. Some of them were so upset they were vomiting as they were testifying. And I don't want that for the patients and the families in Iowa. I think we deserve better. We deserve to be able to give our patients the care that they need without stopping and thinking and wondering if I'm going to break the law, if this could be a criminal activity, or if I need to call my hospital attorneys or administrators so that I can just practice medicine.
When we come back, we hear from an Iowa organization that's been fighting for this law for years, their reaction to it taking effect, and the next legislation that they're now pushing for. Welcome back to Close Up. We continue our coverage of Iowa's new abortion law that is scheduled to take effect at 8 a.m. tomorrow. KCCI spoke with Maggie DeWitty of Pulse Life Advocates about her reaction to this law taking effect and the next legislation she's now pushing for.
After all these years of hard work, to know this was finally coming to fruition was just a lot of joy and excitement, and just feeling very blessed and grateful. The Iowa Board of Medicine put forward their rules several months ago and how this law would be enforced. And so we know that there will be potential sanctions against the doctor, could lose medical license, could have medical license suspended, there could be some fines. Those are the kinds of things that our law allows. Now, we would have, when we put the legislation forward, liked to have seen some criminal penalties against the doctor, but that is not currently part of the legislation. I think right now it's vague, to be honest, as to how this law will be enforced, what will happen to doctors if they break the law. Certainly clarity would be very beneficial. But unfortunately, I think how the rule process was developed through the Iowa Board of Medicine, it does leave it up to more of a case-by-case basis based on the circumstances of the situation. So I think we'll just find out over time how the Iowa Board of Medicine determines they want to move forward with enforcement of this law. I think what's great about Iowa is that Iowa cares for their families and cares for the women and cares for the babies. And we have pregnancy centers across our state, and there's 55 of them, both in rural and urban areas, that have been helping women in crisis pregnancy for years and years, but now through our MOMS program are actually going to get some government assistance to help with the work that they're doing. And so I think that's a real tangible way for people to understand that women are going to be taken care of. Their health care are going to be taken care of, their needs are going to be taken care of, and the work that these pregnancy resource centers across the state are doing is remarkable. And so I'm really proud of the work and have partnerships with many of them across the state and know firsthand just the tremendous work and support they provide for women who are experiencing an unplanned pregnancy. The goal of Pulse Life Advocates for over 50 years of our existence has been to educate Iowans on the sanctity of human life from fertilization until natural death. And so our highest standard is protecting our preborn brothers and sisters from the moment of fertilization, moment of conception. And so that's what we're going to continue to try to strive for, is to get to that point where we are protecting all life in the womb. In years past, we have presented a life at conception bill during legislative sessions, and that's our hope to do that again this legislative session, is to present another life at conception bill for our legislators to consider. Our specific legislation very clearly articulates the fact that a life at conception bill is a completely separate issue from IVF. And of course, we feel that all babies, however they're conceived, should be protected and they have dignity and worth. But that IVF is a separate issue, and so that would be very clearly articulated and addressed in any kind of life at conception bill that would be brought forward, that would be a separate situation, not having anything to do with the life at conception bill. I've been a firm believer that abortion hurts women and is so harmful for them. And so this is one step further in our journey of helping create that culture of life and really protecting moms from the harm of abortion and saying to them, we're here for you, we love you, we support you, and we support your baby, and we'll help you get through it.
Kamala Harris is riding a wave of momentum on the campaign trail after President Biden announced he's ending his re-election bid. And Donald Trump has been quick to turn his focus to Harris. We're going to cover it all with experts on both sides. That's still to come on Close Up. Welcome back to Close Up. Now, there is a lot to sort through. There's been so much in the news regarding this 2024 presidential election, so we are going to talk about it a little bit more. I'm here today with Scott Brennan. He is the only Iowan on the Democratic National Committee Rules and Bylaws Committee. For the Republican perspective, we have David Oman. He is a former co-chair of the Republican Party of Iowa. Thank you both for joining us this morning.
Good morning.
Happy to be here.
Well, Scott, I want to start with you. Obviously, this is such a historic time, having an incumbent president drop out of the race so late in the game. You know, what is the reaction that you have heard from DNC members, from Iowa delegates about this moment, and also about the process of now choosing a new nominee?
It's been fascinating. I mean, the pivot away from an incumbent president to the vice president was shocking, and how fast it happened and how seamlessly it happened. There were certainly a lot of us, I think, who thought, well, there should be some sort of process, but we were nervous about having much process because we just don't have time. And it turned out that there doesn't need to be much of a process. So, we're going to have the Iowa delegation's already endorsed the vice president, and they'll do the virtual roll call because of an issue related to Ohio law. And so she will be our nominee before we even get to the convention, which is fascinating.
What was that meeting like when the Iowa delegates got together and talked about, okay, how are we moving forward? You know, what's kind of been the conversation of how did you come to, we're all, unanimously endorsing Harris?
It came together very quickly. We were on the phone for about an hour, but some people talked about their support for the vice president and why we should support her. And in fact, two of them were the Biden captains, the folks who were supposed to be organizing on behalf of the president. And they moved, with the group. There's always a few people who just talk to hear themselves talk, but we went very quickly, and it was very easy to get to unanimity.
Up until this point, all of the conversation has been around, an incumbent president, a former president, rematching against each other, a neck and neck race. Now we likely will have, Kamala Harris, a vice president who's running against Donald Trump. David, from your perspective, how could this potentially change this race?
Well, the Des Moines Register Iowa poll this spring and summer had Trump up 15, 18 points. Throw all that away. It's a new race. After the Biden debate debacle, the assassination attempt, the Republican convention, which went pretty well for us in terms of putting our party together. Now we've got change on the Democratic ticket, another debate, a state where the two vice presidential candidates are basically not known. They haven't campaigned here before. I think Iowa will be close, much, much closer than has been predicted up to now.
And we've seen Iowa go Obama, Trump. It's one of those states that has, swung quite a bit. Before, it was, again, a Trump-Biden, race. But now
Right.
with Harris on the ticket, do you think that there is any chance that Iowa, is Iowa as solidly red as people see it being? You're saying no?
No, look, if you go back not that many years, Barack Obama sailed in 2008, 2012. I've got the numbers, we don't have time. Trump buffaloed Hillary Clinton and won big here in 2020. I think this race will be much closer, more debates to come. You've got to organize very well, get out your base, but Iowa's a middle ground state. We're middle of America, middle values, and the first campaign that figures out their middle of the road voters that could go either way is probably the campaign that will win.
Well, we will certainly be watching all of those polls, all of the fundraising numbers, all the information as that continues to come out. Our conversation will continue. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Close Up. We continue our conversation with Democratic strategist Scott Brennan and Republican strategist David Oman. Thanks for being here. Well, we've heard so much about the national side of all of this, but I want to talk a little bit about, what the presidential race chaos things that are going on now may mean for Iowa come 2028. Recently, Iowa Democrats moved away from having Iowa as the first in the nation state. Scott, I remember, being with you in D.C. at that meeting where we received the letter from President Biden asking that South Carolina be the first in the nation state. We have had conversations about Iowa Democrats wanting in 2028 to push to get Iowa back in that first in the nation spot. Seeing, Biden withdraw from the race, seeing there be so much change after a nominating process that didn't end up, nominating the nominee. What could that mean for 2028?
Well, obviously the focus is on 2024 because we have to win this election. We've got a lot of really great enthusiasm surrounding the vice president. But clearly 2028 is always in our thought process, and Chair Hart has said that we're going to focus on the fall and then we're going to take a look at 2028. But I think it's an opportunity. We need to get out. We need to show that Iowa Democrats get out, vote strongly in favor of the vice president, and if we have a good turnout and she does well here, that helps our case in 2028.
Well, I know we will focus on 2024 first, and I know we'll have lots of time to talk to you about 2028 as that gets closer. Thank you both for joining us this morning.
Welcome.
We appreciate it. And thank you for joining us for KCCI 8 News Close Up. We'll see you back here next Sunday. Have a great day.